Okay, Beseda, good evening. Welcome back. Hope you had a lovely Yom Tov. So the Halacha slot tonight is entitled Eating Before Davening. It's an interesting area of Halacha and is connected to this week's Parsha because after Noach came out of the Torah, the Pasuk says, Ach basar b'nafshei doma le'sechelu. Adam Harishon was not allowed to eat meat. He was a vegetarian. And for the 10 generations until Noach, they were all vegetarians. But when Noach came out of the Teva, the Pasuk says, Ach basar b'nafshei doma le'sechelu. They're allowed to eat meat, but two restrictions. Number one, they're not allowed to eat Eva Menachai, which means they can't sort of pull a limb off a living animal. And also they can't eat the blood. Now, a related pasuk in Parshas Kedoshim is Lo Soichlu al Hadam. And that also the prohibition not to eat dam, and that actually is the source of not eating before davening. How so? Because the Gemara in Brachos, Daf Yud Amud Beis, the first box there, the second paragraph, My Dichsiv. You can see there's some coughs sleeping in the sukkah, and this is My Dichsiv Lo Soichlu al Hadam. What is pshat in the pasuk in Parshas Kedoshim? Lo Soichlu al Hadam. Says the Gemara in Brachos, Lo Soichlu koidim shetispalu adamchem. Don't eat before you have prayed for your dam, for your own sort of being. That's the first source. Then the Gemara carries on and says, Ikad Amri, Kol ha'oichel v'sheiseh v'achar kach mispalel, someone who eats and drinks and then davens, Olav ha'kosuv omer, v'oisi yishlach ta'achri goyech, al tikra goyech le'geich, which means it's a certain degree of pride. You're worrying about yourself before you turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. After this person has sort of, he's sort of become proud, he's focusing on himself, he's eating and drinking, then and then he decides to daven. That seems wrong. So interestingly, there are two different sources. One is, they're both the Gemara in Brachos, but they're two different reasons. One is, and the second is an Indian of gaiva, of pride. Now, the Torah Tamima notes that there is enough gemina between the two. There is a practical difference between these two reasons. The Torah Tamima says, and this is in Kedoshim, there's enough gemina between these two. According to the second explanation, that it's all to do with arrogance, you're putting your stomach before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If a person said Kriya Shema first, shezehu kabbalas al-malchus shamayim, then mutzalechol v'lishtos. Afshadayin le'ispala kol tfilos. Even though he hasn't finished davening, he said Kriya Shema, then that would be okay. Masha'en kein, according to the first Rosh, le'soichel al-adam, also lechol v'lishtos kodim shegomar tfilas yudches. Then you shouldn't do that before you finish davening properly. So that would be enough gemina. Now, what is the halacha? So the Shulchan Aruch says in Hilchos Tefillin Orachaim Siman Pei Sif Gimel, also leilis asik b'sarcha. A person shouldn't get involved, not just eating and drinking, in any of his own personal activities, ad sheyispal tfilas yudches, until he davens Shemona Esra, brackets, v'yesh mekilin la'achar she'omer mixas brachos. He's done something. Now, presumably, this represents the two themes that we had above. Okay, v'toiv lahachme b'zeh. One should be machme, and one shouldn't eat or drink before davening. V'loy lechol v'loy lishtos. And therefore, one should not eat. One should be machme not to eat or drink before davening. However, there are some things which are fine. For example, the Shulchan Aruch says, "Avol mayim mutzer lishtos kodim tefillah." Drinking water before davening, no problem. Bein b'chol bein b'Shabbos v'Yontif, whether it's weekday or Shabbos v'Yontif. V'chein oichel mashkim l'refuah, and so too eating or drinking for medical purposes, no problem. Now, the Mishnah Berurah on this, talking about water, he expands it a little bit. He says, why is water okay? He says, "D'lo shayach bu gaiva," because there's no arrogance there. You know, if you're sipping a pina colada, right, then maybe. But if you're having a cold glass of water, no problem. And he even talks about hot drinks. And he says hot drinks also, mayim, hot or cold, no problem. He says, "V'dafka below tzukah," without sugar. We'll see in a second. Avalim sukkah osa, but with sugar it's not allowed. V'kol shkein mashka sheikha, which means an intoxicating drink. He says shekorin beer. Right, to have a beer before Shacharis seems a strange thing to do. But if a person wants to have a strong drink before Shacharis, that's wrong. Vaday osa. V'tei v'coffee, mutar lishtoisei kodim tefillah, to have a tea or a coffee before you daven, that's okay. Kadei sheyuchel lechaven daita v'lispal, in order to focus us on our davening. Of a problem komish beginning bohem, and certainly in places where we regularly drink tea and coffee, the aim is yashiv adas biltom, and it's hard to focus. We can't get by without our daily fix of coffee before we start the day. Now, the Mishnah Berurah says that's a tea and coffee without sugar, without milk. Now, that is, Mishnah Berurah writing 100 plus years ago in Eastern Europe. Baruch Hashem, we're living in times now where milk, sugar are not considered an unusual, indulgent sort of thing, and therefore it's not a problem. The Halacha Shlomo Zalman says, if a person feels he needs to drink before davening, he's allowed to drink coffee, sugar, milk, no problem. If possible, he should say Shema or V'choneni Hashem or something before that. But the Kibbutz is Manenu Kol Adam Sheisakach. We all drink our tea and coffee with milk, with sugar. It's not considered a big deal. This is not arrogance. And that's, it's very, very common. I once saw a person, Dafka, not have milk, and it was like unusual. He chose not to have milk because of this, but it's very, very rare. And everyone seems to be drinking tea, coffee, sugar, milk before davening, no problem. The Kaf HaChaim, interestingly, says to have a whole glass of milk, that's not. Because that's considered nourishing, and therefore one should avoid that. And also one should avoid drinking in a social setting. Sometimes I come to school in the morning, and we've got laid up for breakfast after davening, and there's teas and coffees, and the guys, they have a tea and a coffee beforehand, which is fine, no problem. But when they, half a dozen sitting down, they're talking already, and it's 3, 4, 5, 6 minutes in, and that's what's not allowed. The Mishnah Berurah then goes on and says, the bottom box, to drink it in a social gathering, to sit down and literally have a coffee with your friends before davening, that's considered your own chafetzin, that's your own socializing. And if you're drinking in that setting, who knows where it leads? It will carry on past perhaps kriyashma, therefore you've got to be careful of that. Now, when does the prohibition begin? From when is it also to start drinking? So, for example, in the winter, right? The clocks change this Motzei Shabbos. So, come Sunday, it's and we're heading towards the winter. It can be 7 o'clock in the morning. It's still dark outside. Is it a problem to drink then? So, the halacha is that you're not allowed to have a full meal, to begin a full meal, which is a kibetza of bread or mazonos, 30 minutes before Alos HaShacha. Alos HaShacha is dawn. That's the first, you can't see the sun. That's when the clouds, the sky starts lightening up. Now that is generally considered, there are different ways of calculating it, but it's generally considered to be 72 minutes before Nates. So this morning, I don't know exactly, but I think Nates is around, say 7:30, say 7:32. So that means Alos HaShacha will be, according to this calculation, 72 minutes before that at 6:20. So half an hour before that, from 5:50, before that time, no problem. At 5:30 in the morning, you want to have the full English breakfast, no problem. It's no different halachically from having it at 10 o'clock at night or 2 o'clock in the morning. So half an hour before Alos HaShacha, one shouldn't begin a full meal. That's the beginning point. Now, but we're not talking about a full meal. We're talking about Shabbos morning, you go to shul. During the week it's a bit easier. You go, it's a quicker davening. You want to have a coffee, no problem. But but Shabbos morning, people maybe to be in shul till 11:30, 12 o'clock or later. So are you allowed to have a piece of cake with your coffee? Are you allowed to have a cereal, some fruit? What's the story? So the prohibition of eating before davening, it begins at Alos HaShacha, not beginning a full meal. That begins at Alos HaShacha, which is, as I said, is 72 minutes before Nates. Now, when is it okay to eat before davening? So we've seen 2 exceptions. One is mayim and various drinks, okay, and l'shem refuah. Now the Shulchan Aruch then says, if you look at the next box, the second box on the second side, avul mayim mutar lishtos kodim tefillah. But water you can drink before tefillah. V'chein oichten umashkim l'refuah mutar. Hatzomeh v'harav harim b'chlal acholim. So someone who's very hungry, very thirsty, he's considered a cholah. If you can manage without and focus, then great. Now, you've got to be honest, but a person who therefore feels on Shabbos morning, he needs a cup of, needs some cake with his coffee or some biscuits and some fruit, a cereal or something, because he feels it will be too long by the time he gets to the Kiddush or whatever it is, then that's okay. If it's in order to help his davening, but if it's possible to avoid it, that's of course better. But if he finds himself so hungry that he can't properly focus on his davening, then that would seem to be okay. Interestingly, the Bir Halacha says something which I don't think is so well known. The Bir Halacha says, Kos v'achronim, the ish chalash, a person who is weak, she'eni yochel lahamid al nafshay, ad eish shegrim hatzibut tfilasam. Like you go to a main minyan, on Shabbos morning or Yontif, we just experienced Yontif, it can go until till 12 o'clock. By the time you're home, it's later. A person who is weak and can't sort of cope till then, listen to what he says. Better he davens shachris at home b'yechidus, v'yoichel ma'at, and then you eat a little bit, make kiddush and eat a little bit. V'achar kach yelech l'beis hakneses l'shmoya kaddish, and of course if it's during the week, there's no kiddush, right? But then you eat and then you go to shul. L'shmoya kaddish v'baruchu v'shad divrei kedusha b'sheyoichel koydem hatfilah, rather than eat before tefillah. Interesting. Okay, so one has to balance that. But eating before davening, if a person feels he won't be able to focus otherwise, then the Shulchan Aruch seems to say that it's okay. The Bir Halacha does add that it's better to daven b'yechidus beforehand and eat something and then go to shul to hear the Dvarim Shem Kedusha, which need a minyan. If a person is taking medications or vitamins, even for a minor ailment, that's no problem. You're taking antibiotics or something that requires you to eat something, then that's not a problem whatsoever. Now, what about women and eating before davening? Now, this is very interesting. So, women also may not eat before davening. Okay, there's no difference. However, here's the big however. What is the obligation of a woman to daven? I think once we had a shiur on it, it's time to perhaps to revisit the topic. But there's a machlokes whether women have an obligation to daven as the same as men or not. And that's a famous machlokes between the Rambam and the Ramban. And according to one opinion, just all they have to do is a minimal amount of davening, which could be the three elements of davening, a bakosha, a shvach, and a hida'ah, which could be just birchas hashach and birchas haTorah, saying avorabo even on it. So that all has all those three elements. That's all you need to do. According to the other opinion, no, they've got to daven properly. So therefore, the poskim say that a woman can eat after reciting birchas hashacha, since some poskim have said they've already fulfilled their minimum obligation. So they need to just say birchas hashacha, they can have breakfast. And the interesting thing is you can rely on this even if you plan to daven the entire davening later. So if you need to just, you start off birchas hashacha, it can take a couple of minutes, you can then have breakfast, and then you get a window later on in the morning at 9:30, 10 o'clock, and you're going to daven then, fine. And this is nogeya to hundreds of schools and Beis Yaakovs and SEMs and whatever all over the world. Because most schools and SEMs, they're going to daven together here in Hasmonean, right? So we've got a nice davening at 8:35 till 9 o'clock. They come in, they register, and they've got 25 minutes, right? So then they're going to go straight to lessons. They don't have breakfast afterwards. So what do? You can't make them fast until lunchtime or break time. So the Reb Shlomo Zalman was asked this question, and it's not a new question. If you take a look at the box Halichas Bas Yisrael, Shaharigam al Isha Bas Chal Isa Achila Kodim Tfilas Kanal. This prohibition applies to women as well. Ochein Yesh Lodin Bekovid Rosh. One has to weigh very carefully. B'noyh b'roiv Botei HaSefer v'Haseminarim, the bonos for women's schools and the girls' schools and seminar and sems. B'hem mispalos kalabonos b'kitosom, where the girls daven in their class or an assembly. U'chotetzah mikach ne'elotzos bonus rabbis. So many women are going to be stuck over here. Or be'ikah hagoros b'merchet b'beis hasefer, especially those who live far away and they've got to come from quite a distance. That means they've got to leave home early. Le'echol b'beis and koydem atfilah. Me'idach kiyuma shel tfilah sheyachol b'beis hasefer. On the other hand, davening together with everyone in assembly or in school is with tachas hashkocha v'hadrocha mechaneches, underneath the supervision of the teachers. It will be a better davening if they daven in school than at home. So what to do? So he says here, V'chein kosov li'hagonim Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, Halichas Bas Yisrael wrote to Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and who wrote back and said the following: the Inyan bonus seminarim v'chadoyim haroitis le'achol b'beisim kodim halichosim le'beis hasefer. Those girls who want to eat at home before they go to school, Re'ei Mishnah Berurah, etc. Shemachme b'shachris u'mincha v'lemaisa nohug lahokel The minhag is nowadays we are makil. The girls can have their breakfast before they go to school, before they go to sem. Let them just say something before. So they should say Birchas HaShachar, they should say Kriya Shema, they should do something. Of course, if they say Birchas HaShachar when they get to school, they shouldn't repeat it again because they've already said it. But they should say something. For chinuch purposes, that would be acceptable. Because meikadin, they're part of Kriya Shema, they should do that. Okay, and that's what we advise in school. I'm sure most schools do the same. Just two quick other points. What about chewing gum? Does that get caught by the prohibition of eating? I know there are people who've got strong feelings about chewing gum. But look what the Mishnah Berurah says. A person's got saliva and he doesn't want to sort of spit in the shul. He should chew some licorice beforehand. You're just chewing gum, that's not considered gaivadik. Now you could say that this is to get rid of phlegm and it's sort of medicinal almost. It's not quite the same as chewing gum, but they bring this as chewing gum before davening would be okay. And one final point, what about exercising before davening? That's a very interesting one. What if, the only time you can really go is go for a run in the morning or go to the gym or just whatever your exercise is. What about doing that first thing in the morning before davening? So interestingly, the Tefillah Kehilchasa quotes from Chaim Pinchas Scheinberg. He says, a guy wants to do exercise for health purposes. So he should be fit and healthy to serve Hashem. And it's only possible, the only slots he has is before davening. Rashai, he's allowed to. So for example, let's say he goes, his swimming pool where they have men swimming is only at certain times, then he's allowed to. But tonight, okay, so long as you don't miss the Zman of Kriya Shema. So there you have it, an overview of eating before davening, based on related a bit tenuously on a pasuk in this week's parsha. But based on the pasuk you have two reasons that you shouldn't eat before davening. One is and the second reason is gaiva. It's considered an arrogant thing to do. The Shulchan Aruch does say that drinking is no problem nowadays. That includes tea, coffee, sugar, milk, no problem. And anything for medical reasons is absolutely fine. One shouldn't begin a full meal, which is a kibbutz of bread and mazonos, that's 30 minutes before Alois HaShachar. Neitz HaChama, which is 72 minutes after that, right? That neitz is when the sun actually, you can suddenly see it sort of creep over the horizon. But the prohibition of just eating stam is from Alois, which is 72 minutes. The normal way of calculating is 72 minutes for neitz. And women should preferably daven. This applies to them as well. They should preferably daven first and then eat. But if they need to, they can just do a minimal davening and then eat and then daven more later. And exercise, as we said, would be allowed. Scheinberg would allow that before davening. Okay, so.